My son laid a hand on me inside my own kitchen, and I didn't say a word. But the next morning, when he came downstairs thinking I'd just accepted his disrespect, he froze in sheer terror when he saw who was sitting at my dining room table. I was sitting at the head of the table, smoothing out the lace tablecloth, when Jeremiah walked into the room with that air of his, like he owned the world. He hadn't even noticed the swelling on my lip. He was so focused on himself. He grabbed a biscuit, took a bite, and started talking about how things were going to change in this house. But the words died in his throat when the chair next to me moved. His face, which had been flushed from the liquor, turned gray, like he'd seen a ghost. The biscuit fell from his hand and crumbled on the floor. He knew in that 1 second that my silence the night before hadn't been fear. It had been a verdict. But for you to understand how we got to this breakfast that felt more like a courtroom, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Gwendolyn Hayes. I'm 68 years old, a widow, and I live in an old neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia. You know the kind of houses with the big porches and the old oak trees out front? Well, that's me. I've always been a peaceful woman. I raised my son on my own after my Robert passed, worked 2 jobs so he'd never want for anything. But until about 6 hours ago, I didn't know I was sleeping with the enemy right under my own roof. It all happened, or maybe it all fell apart, around 3 in the morning. Jeremiah came home. I was in the kitchen, sitting in my rocking chair, listening to a hymn on the radio, real low, to calm my nerves. It was raining hard outside, but the sound that startled me was the key scraping in the front door, all rough-like. He stumbled in, smelling of cheap bourbon and cigarettes. I stayed quiet. He threw his keys on the hall table, and I heard something break. It was my ceramic vase, the blue one my grandmother gave me. He didn't even look back. He walked into the kitchen, and when he saw me, his anger just seemed to swell up. He started yelling, saying it was my fault his life was a mess, that I cared more about the house and my old junk than I did about him. I got up slowly and said, "Son, go to bed. You're not well." That's all it took. That was the trigger. He came at me. A 41-year-old man, strong, against his own mother. He grabbed me by my arms and shook me so hard I felt my teeth rattle. And then he shoved me. I went flying into the china cabinet. The hard wood hit my back and my head cracked against the glass. And it didn't stop there. He raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The sound was loud. The pain was hot. I tasted iron in my mouth right away. My lip was split. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stayed there, crumpled up, looking at him. And him? He just huffed, turned his back, and went upstairs, leaving his mother bleeding in the kitchen. The silence in the house after that was heavy, you know? The kind of quiet after something breaks and there's no fixing it. I went to the little half-bath mirror. I washed my face with cold water. I saw the cut on my lip, the start of a bruise on my cheek. In that moment, looking into my own eyes, I didn't see a victim. I saw the Gwendolyn who survived too much to put up with that. I decided right then and there. That was the last time. I went back to the kitchen, cleaned up the blood, and instead of going to bed to cry, I started cooking. It was the only thing I could do to keep from losing my mind. I got out the flour, the butter, the baking powder. I grabbed that new set of champagne-colored non-stick baking sheets, you know? The one my sister sent me, she said they were the best 'cause nothing sticks to 'em. And they are, real pretty and sturdy. I used them all night long. While the world slept and my son snored upstairs, I baked dozens of biscuits on those sheets. Every time I kneaded the dough, I thought about what I had to do. With every batch that came out golden from those baking sheets, my plan got clearer. I wasn't going to fight him with yelling. I was going to use the one language Jeremiah seemed to have forgotten, respect, and the law. I set the table like it was Christmas. Lace tablecloth, fine china, fresh coffee. Everything perfect. When the clock hit 7:30, I was ready. The smell of the food went upstairs like bait. I knew he'd come down, and I knew he'd think everything was fine, 'cause a mother forgives everything, right? Little did he know that forgiveness this time was coming with a side of justice. Jeremiah came down, face all puffy and arrogant as ever. He saw the table set and gave a crooked smile. He thought he'd won. But then, at 8 o'clock sharp, The doorbell rang, and his world was about to come crashing down. The first batch of biscuits came out of the oven at 4:10 in the morning. The smell of butter and buttermilk spread through the kitchen, a smell that should have meant comfort, home, lazy Sunday mornings. But in the pre-dawn hours, it was the smell of my resolve. It was thick, almost suffocating. I set the hot baking sheet on the stove rack, and the metal made a little sound, a ting, in the quiet house. My hands, covered in flour, looked like a ghost's. I moved around the kitchen with a calm that wasn't mine. It was a borrowed calm, an armor I'd put on over the trembling woman who'd been on the floor just hours before. As I started preparing the second batch of dough, my eyes landed on something on the counter, next to the sugar bowl. It's one of those modern digital photo frames, you know, with the sleek black screen. My sister Paulette gave it to me for Christmas. "No more dusty photo albums, Gwen," she told me over the phone from Atlanta. "I bought it on some website. It's beautiful. You just load the pictures and it cycles through so you can remember the good things." And there it was, day and night, cycling through pictures of my life, a loop of happy memories, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. And right as I looked, a picture popped up. Jeremiah. He must have been about 8. Standing on a fishing boat, his hair all messy from the wind, with a smile that showed the gap where a tooth had fallen out. He was holding up a little fish, a bass, with both hands, like it was the biggest trophy in the world. Next to him, my Robert, his father, was smiling with so much pride his eyes were nearly shut. Oh my God, that picture hit me like a punch to the gut. I leaned against the counter, the flour smudging my robe. I closed my eyes, and I wasn't in my kitchen at 4 in the morning with a split lip anymore. I was back on Lake Lanier on that summer day in 1990. I remember the smell of sunscreen and damp earth. I remember the sound of Robert's laughter echoing across the water. Jeremiah had spent all morning trying to catch something. He was such a patient, determined little boy. When he finally felt that tug on the line, his shriek of joy scared the birds out of the trees. "Daddy, I got one! I got one!" Robert helped him reel it in, calmly teaching him how to hold it. "Look at that, Gwen!" Robert had yelled to me on the shore where I was setting up our picnic. "We got a fisherman in the family." The pride in my husband's voice, it was the most beautiful thing. And Jeremiah, he just looked up at his father like Robert was a superhero, with an adoration, a respect, a love that felt unbreakable. Where did that little boy go? Where in God's name did he get lost? The photo frame changed the picture. Now it was Jeremiah at his high school graduation. Him in a blue cap and gown, holding his diploma. I was next to him, 30 years younger, with a smile so big it felt like it would split my face. He was the first in our family to go to college. The very first. Our church community, the First African Baptist, threw a party for him. Sister Eloise made his favorite carrot cake with cream cheese frosting. Reverend Michael said a prayer for him from the pulpit, calling him our young scholar, an example to us all. I remember sitting there, in that church pew, and feeling my chest swell with so much pride. Gwendolyn Hayes's son. The boy Robert didn't live to see graduate, because Robert was gone by the time Jeremiah was 21, in his last year of college. A massive heart attack, right there on the shipyard docks. He left for work in the morning, kissed me on the forehead, and never came home. Robert's death was an earthquake that shook the foundations of our house, but we survived. I made myself strong for Jeremiah. At the funeral, he held my hand so tight. He didn't cry in front of anyone, just stood there, tall and serious, the spitting image of his father. That night, after everyone had left, he hugged me in the kitchen and just sobbed on my shoulder. "I'm gonna take care of you now, Mama," he said. "I promise. I'm gonna make Daddy proud of me." And he did. For a long time, he did. He graduated with honors, got a good office job at the same port where his father had worked, bought a nice car, helped with the bills. On Sundays, he'd take me to church, sit beside me in the pew, and sing the hymns in that deep baritone voice of his, just like his daddy's. The old folks in the church would look at him and say, "Gwen, you did a fine job. Robert would be so proud of that boy." And I believed it. I lived for that pride. It was my sunshine, my light. Seeing my son become a good man, a respected man, It was proof that all my sacrifice had been worth it. The screen on the frame flickered again. A more recent photo. A 4th of July barbecue in our backyard, maybe 3 years ago. Jeremiah was at the grill, laughing, wearing an apron that said, "The Grill King." He was a little heavier, but he looked happy. Our neighbors were there, Mrs. Bernice, her husband, who was still alive then. It looked like a perfect life, straight out of a magazine. But happiness, sometimes, is just a photograph, a frozen moment. Because it was right after that barbecue that the cracks started to show. It started with his job. Restructuring. That's the word they used. The port was modernizing, bringing in new people with new ideas. Jeremiah's position, which had been secure for nearly 20 years, was suddenly optimized. They demoted him, gave him a desk in a corner with far less responsibility and, worst of all, less respect. For Jeremiah, that wasn't just losing a title. It was like they'd erased his father's memory. He felt the legacy of Robert, a man who gave his life to that place, had been dishonored. He didn't tell me the details at the time. He just got quiet, a different kind of quiet than mine that morning. His quiet was sharp, full of thorns. He started coming home later. I'd smell the liquor on him, but pretend I didn't. Had a long meeting, he'd lie, and I'd pretend to believe him, and then the money started getting tight. "Mom, can you lend me $200? I'll pay you back at the end of the month." I'd lend it, and he'd never pay it back. Then it was 500, and on it went. The first time he raised his voice at me in a way that scared me. I'll never forget it. It was over something stupid. A faucet in the kitchen was dripping. I'd asked him 3 times to fix it. That Saturday morning, I asked again. "Jeremiah, honey, when you have a minute, could you take a look at that faucet?" I was washing some collard greens in the sink. He was at the table, reading the paper. He didn't look up, just said in a low, gravelly voice, "Let the damn thing drip." The rudeness caught me off guard. "But son, it's wasting water and the noise bothers me." That's when he snapped. He slammed the newspaper down on the table so hard the coffee cup jumped. He stood up, and for the first time, he loomed over me. Not my boy, not my proud young man, but a big, angry man. "Damn faucet!" he yelled, his voice echoing in the kitchen. "You're worried about a damn faucet when my life is going down the drain? If Daddy were here, he wouldn't have let this happen. He was a real man. He would have handled things. But no, I'm stuck with you. A woman who cares more about a dripping faucet than her own son." I took a step back. My heart was racing. I held onto the edge of the sink, my hands wet and cold. It wasn't what he said. It was his eyes. There was a look in them I'd never seen before. A nasty, poisonous resentment. And for the first time in my life, I felt a chill of fear for my own son. Not a fear that he'd get hurt. A fear of what he might do. I didn't answer. I just stood there, watching him as he grabbed his car keys and stormed out, slamming the door. I was left in the kitchen, listening to the sound of the dripping faucet. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop seemed to be marking the time of a new era in our house. The era of fear. I sighed, pulling myself back to the cold morning. The smell of biscuits was in the oven again. I pulled the sheet out with an oven mitt, the heat hitting my bruised face. The photo on the frame had changed again. It was a picture of me and Robert on our wedding day. So young, so full of hope. "Oh, Robert," I whispered to the empty house, "you would not like the man our boy has become." I reached for the bowl to start the 3rd batch. I was going to need a lot of biscuits. After all, I had important company coming for breakfast. And Mrs. Bernice, I knew, loved my biscuits with peach preserves. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed 5. The deep, melancholic bells rolled through the house, marking another hour of my vigil. I already had 3 batches of biscuits cooling on the rack, perfectly golden, lined up like little soldiers. My kitchen, which had always been my sanctuary, my place of creation, had become a war room. I moved with a precision that came from deep in my soul, but my body, oh, my body was starting to feel the toll of the night. My back, where I'd hit the china cabinet, ached with a dull, throbbing pain. My lip was swollen and pulsed, and exhaustion was beginning to seep into my veins, A slow poison. I needed coffee. Strong. I went to the counter and pressed the button on my coffee maker. It's one of those programmable ones, you know? A real modern thing I bought a few months ago. A red one, real pretty, that matched the accents in my kitchen. I bought it because I thought it would be practical. I could set everything up at night, the water, the coffee grounds, the filter, and program it to start brewing at 6 in the morning. I thought that if Jeremiah woke up to the smell of fresh coffee, maybe his mood would be a little better. Maybe he wouldn't wake up with that dark cloud already hanging over his head. What a fool I was, trying to use the smell of coffee to sweeten a man's bitterness. For the last few months, that coffee maker had become just another tool in my routine of walking on eggshells. I made sure the coffee was always ready, that his favorite mug, the big blue ceramic one, was clean and in its usual spot, that the newspaper was on the table. Any little thing out of place, any deviation from the routine I'd built to appease him could be the trigger for a whole day of rudeness and punishing silence. As the hot water began to drip through the filter, releasing that wonderful aroma of roasted coffee, I let myself sit down for just a moment. I closed my eyes. The pain in my back flared, and the memories of the last 2 years came flooding in, like a tidal wave. They weren't good memories, like the ones on the digital photo frame. They were the memories I tried to shove to the back of my mind every single day. After that first blow-up over the faucet, things were never the same. That incident opened a door inside him, a door that let out a monster I didn't know. And I, out of fear, out of shame, out of a mother's love that was turning toxic, I let that monster make a home in my house. The full layoff from the port came 6 months later. They called him into the boss's office on a Friday afternoon and handed him a cardboard box for his things. 20 years of service, tossed out like trash. He came home that day pale, carrying the box like it was a coffin. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just put the box in the middle of the living room, went upstairs to his room, and stayed there for 2 days. I'd knock on the door, bring him food, beg him to come out. Nothing. On the 3rd day, he came out. And he was a different man. What little respect he had left in him, the last spark of that proud boy the church had applauded, was gone. From that day on, everything was my fault. If it rained, it was my fault. If his football team lost, it was my fault. And most of all, his father's absence was my fault. "You never really understood him," he'd scream, his breath already smelling of liquor at 3 in the afternoon. "You think he was happy working like a dog at that port? He worked himself to death for you, for this house. And what did you do? You turned the house into a museum. You worshiped the chair he sat in more than the son he left behind." It was cruel, and it was a lie. Robert loved his work. He was proud to be a man who worked with his hands, who provided for his family. And I loved Robert. I didn't worship things. I cherished memories. But how do you explain that to a man who's decided to rewrite his own history to justify his misery? The house, once my refuge, became my battlefield. I learned to read the signs, the way he slammed the car door, the sound of his footsteps on the porch. I could tell, just from those little things, if the night would be filled with yelling or icy silence. Both were torture. The financial manipulation got worse. He stopped asking to borrow. He started demanding. He started using my credit card without asking. I'd see the bills come in, charges from bars, liquor stores. I'd try to talk to him. "Jeremiah, we need to watch our spending." The answer was always the same. "It's my money too. The money Daddy left. Or do you think this house pays for itself?" He'd forget that I had my own retirement, Robert's pension, and the money I still made doing small sewing jobs for the ladies in the neighborhood. But in his mind, everything was his. The house was his, the money was his, and apparently I was his, to use and abuse as he saw fit. I became a prisoner in my own home. I stopped inviting my friends over for afternoon tea. Mrs. Bernice, my next-door neighbor and best friend, would sometimes stop at the gate. "Gwen, is everything all right? I haven't seen you in days." And I'd lie. "Oh, Bernice, it's just my rheumatism acting up. I'm just taking it easy." The shame was eating me alive. How could I admit that my son, the young scholar, the pride of the community, was treating me like dirt? How could I tell her I was scared within my own four walls? I remember one night, a few months back. He came home drunk, as usual. But this time, he was euphoric. He'd won some money in a game of pool, I think. He came into the living room, where I was watching television, and plopped down on the sofa, laughing loudly. He wanted to talk, but I was so exhausted from living on that emotional roller coaster that I just couldn't. I just wanted peace. "Son, I'm tired. I'm going up to bed," I said, getting up. The change in his face was instant. The smile vanished. "Oh, of course. Now that I'm in a good mood, you're going to abandon me. But when I'm down, you just sit there, with that martyr face of yours, looking at me like I'm a worm, right?" He stood up and came toward me. He didn't touch me, but he stood in front of me, blocking my way. And he started talking. Low. And it was worse than the yelling. "You like this, don't you, Mom? You like seeing me suffer. It makes you feel superior. The holy widow who sacrificed everything for her ungrateful son. Is that the story you tell yourself? Is that what helps you sleep at night?" He just stood there, spitting that poison at me, for nearly 10 minutes. And I just stood there, unable to move, just taking it. I felt myself shrinking, getting smaller, weaker, with every word he said. When he finally got tired and moved out of my way, I went up the stairs, shaking. I got to my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. And for the first time in a long, long time, I cried. I cried silently, muffling the sobs in my pillow, so he wouldn't have the satisfaction of hearing me. The beeping of the coffee maker brought me back to the early morning. The coffee was ready. I stood up, the pain in my back reminding me that the violence of that night had been different. He had crossed a line, a physical line. He had touched me in anger. And the slap, that slap wasn't just to my face, it was to my soul. I opened the cupboard and took out my best china. The dinner set I got for my wedding, with the little hand-painted blue flowers. I rarely used it. It was for special occasions. And this, I decided, was the most special occasion of all. It was the day of my liberation. I set the table with meticulous care. The lace tablecloth, the plates, the silver cutlery that I'd polished just last week. I put a small vase with a white camellia from my garden in the center. The table was beautiful, a scene of peace and order, a perfect lie. As I put the cups in their places, I thought about the storm outside, the hard rain, the howling wind. It felt like nature was mirroring the turmoil inside me. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the storm. Not the one outside, and not the one sleeping upstairs. Because I knew that when the sun came up, my own personal storm was finally going to break. I looked at the clock. 5:45. I still had time. Time to bake the last batch of biscuits. And time to make the phone calls that would change everything. The house was about to wake up, and justice, my dear, was going to be served hot, right alongside the coffee. It was exactly 3:15 in the morning when the key scraped in the front door lock. I know the exact time because the grandfather clock had just chimed 3, and I'd counted every one of the 15 ticks that came after. I was sitting in my rocking chair in the kitchen, wrapped in my bathrobe. It was a flannel bathrobe, real thick and plush, a deep navy blue. I bought it last winter because my joints ache something fierce with the savannah damp and cold. I remember thinking, when the package arrived, that it felt like a hug. And that morning, I was clutching it around me like it was a shield, trying to find some kind of warmth, some kind of protection from the cold that was coming from inside me. The door flew open with a bang, like it had been kicked, and slammed against the hallway wall. The sound echoed through the silent house. My heart jumped and started beating a fast, frantic rhythm in my chest. I held my breath. I waited. Jeremiah came in, a dark silhouette against the dim street light. The rain had gotten heavier, and he was soaked to the bone. Water dripped from his hair, from his coat, making a dark puddle on my wood floor. He looked like a wounded, angry animal that had sought shelter from the storm. He just stood there for a moment, his breathing heavy, almost a growl. And then he moved. With a sudden fury, he pulled the bundle of keys from his pocket and threw it with all his might toward the little hall table. I heard the sharp, shattering sound of ceramic. My vase, my blue vase that had belonged to my grandmother. The sound of that heirloom breaking was like the sound of my own heart splitting in two. A dry sob rose in my throat, but I forced it down. Crying now? No. Crying would be a luxury, and it would be dangerous. He didn't seem to care what he'd broken. He kicked the door shut and came walking toward the kitchen. His steps were heavy, unsteady. The smell hit me first, a sharp, sour smell of cheap bourbon mixed with the smell of rain and pure rage. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, his big body filling the frame. The only light was the one over the stove, a yellowish light that cast long, frightening shadows. His eyes found me in the dimness. "What is it, Mom?" His voice was a slur, thick and pasty from the drink. He took a step into the kitchen, sitting there in the dark like a ghost, waiting up to give me a lecture, to judge me. I didn't move in my chair. I kept my hands clamped on the arms of the rocker, feeling the worn wood under my fingers. I knew from experience that any move I made could be seen as a provocation. Silence was my only defense. "Answer me!" he suddenly yelled, and his voice echoed off the pots hanging on the wall. "Are you praying for my lost soul? Or are you more worried about your damn old vase I broke?" The mention of the vase, the coldness with which he spoke of that object he knew meant so much to me, gave me a courage I didn't know I had. I stopped rocking. Slowly, with what little dignity I had left, I stood up. My back popped. I looked him straight in the eye, trying to find, deep down, any trace of my boy. "Jeremiah, son," my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm not going to lecture you. I just want you to go get some rest. You're all wet. You'll catch a cold. We can talk in the morning when you're feeling better." It was the wrong thing to say. I should have known. Trying to be reasonable with a man who has lost his reason is like trying to put out a fire with a thimble of water. My words, my calm, my motherly concern, to him they sounded like an insult, like I was treating him like a child. His face twisted into a mask of fury. "Don't you tell me what to do," he roared, taking another step toward me. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You don't understand anything. You never have. You live in your little fairy tale world with your old junk, your memories, Daddy's ghost. The real world is out there, Mom, and it's eating me alive. And you just sit there and tell me to go to sleep." "That's not it, son," I started to say, holding up a hand in a gesture of peace. "Shut up." His shout was so violent I flinched, and then he came at me. It wasn't a shove, it was an assault. He grabbed my upper arms with a strength I never imagined he had. A strength born of frustration and alcohol. His fingers were like steel talons, digging into the thin skin of my arms. The pain was immediate and searing. "Jeremiah, stop! Please, you're hurting me!" I cried out, and for the first time, my voice broke with panic. But he wasn't listening. His eyes were glazed over, focused on something only he could see. He started to shake me, back and forth, violently. My body, frail and old, swung like a rag doll's. My head snapped back and forth. My glasses flew off my face and landed on the floor with a soft thud. The world around me became a blur of lights and shadows. The kitchen shelves, the refrigerator, the table, everything was spinning. "You only care about things, about this house, about him," he was screaming, and with every word he shook me harder. "I'm nothing to you. I never was. I'm just a burden, the failure son of the great Robert Hayes." I was getting dizzy. The air wouldn't come into my lungs. I tried to pull away, but it was useless. He was so much stronger. At some point, during the violent rocking, my feet lost contact with the floor. And that's when he threw me. It wasn't a push. He threw me. My body flew backward, toward the wall where my grandmother's china cabinet stood. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the dark wood of the cabinet getting closer, as if in slow motion. There was no time to protect myself, to put my arms out. The impact was brutal. First, my back hit with a deep, hollow thud against the solid wood. I felt like my spine was going to snap in two. The blow knocked the wind out of me in a single, painful gasp. And in the same instant, my head, carried by the momentum, whipped to the side and cracked hard against the corner of the cabinet. An explosion of white light and sharp pain behind my eyes. The sound was a dry snap, a crack, that seemed to echo inside my skull. The The world went white for a second. A loud ringing, like a million bees, filled my ears. I slid down the wall, my legs like jelly, and collapsed to the floor. The pain was overwhelming. A throbbing pain in the back of my head, a sharp pain in my back, a burning pain in my arms where he had held me. I was stunned, confused. I tried to focus my eyes. I saw the kitchen spinning, the lights distorting. And then I saw him. He was standing a few feet away, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. He was looking down at me, on the floor, with an unreadable expression. And I thought, it's over. He'll stop now. He'll realize what he's done. But no, he took a step toward me. I flinched instinctively, trying to shield myself with my arms. And his hand came, open, fast, violent. The slap cracked through the air, an ugly, wet sound. It caught me square across the face. My head was thrown to the side from the impact. I felt the skin of my lip tear against my own teeth, and the hot, salty taste of blood filled my mouth. And that was it, the final act. He stood there, over me, for a few more seconds. His breathing was still heavy. I looked up at him from the floor. My son, the baby I carried in my arms, the boy I taught to walk, to talk, to pray, and I didn't recognize him. The man in front of me, with his hate-filled eyes, was a stranger, an intruder, a monster. And then, without another word, as if he'd finally expelled all the poison he was carrying, he turned. He turned his back on his mother, lying bruised and bleeding on the kitchen floor. And he went upstairs. I heard his steps, heavy and slow, in the upstairs hallway. And then, the final sound, the slam of his bedroom door, a sound that sealed my fate and his. The sound that began the longest morning of my life. The silence that settled in the kitchen after his bedroom door slammed shut was the heaviest thing I have ever felt in my life. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a vacuum, a silence of shock, the kind of quiet that comes after an explosion when everything around you is destroyed and the dust hasn't settled yet. The only thing I could hear was the sound of the rain outside, relentless, and the sharp ringing inside my own head. I lay there, on the floor, for what felt like an eternity. My whole body ached, every muscle, every bone. The back of my head throbbed with a steady, nauseating rhythm. The taste of blood in my mouth was strong, and I could feel a warm trickle running down my chin. I was curled up, my arms wrapped around my knees like a frightened child, and for a moment, that's all I was. Scared, terrified. A 68-year-old woman, alone, hurt on the floor of her own home by the person she loved most in the world. The tears came, silent, hot. They ran down my face and mixed with the blood on my chin. They weren't tears of anger. They were tears of pure, absolute grief. A grief that wasn't just physical. It was the pain of betrayal. The pain of looking at the fruit of your womb and seeing a stranger. The pain of realizing that the love you gave, the life you sacrificed, had produced this. A man capable of raising his hand to his own mother. I thought of my Robert. What would he say if he saw me like this? Robert was a gentle man, but a firm one. He never raised his voice to me in 30 years of marriage. He treated his own mother, a small, frail woman, like she was a queen made of crystal. If he saw what Jeremiah had become, his heart would break all over again wherever he was. The image of my husband gave me a spark of strength. I couldn't just lie here on the floor crying. Robert wouldn't have wanted that. My mother wouldn't have wanted that. My grandmother, who faced things I can't even imagine, certainly wouldn't have wanted that. I'm made of stronger stuff. I had just forgotten. With a groan of pain, I pushed myself up, using the leg of the kitchen table for support. The cold, solid wood gave me an anchor. Slowly, inch by inch, I got to my feet. My legs were shaking so badly I thought I'd fall again. I held onto the edge of the table, breathing deeply, trying to fight off the dizziness. The whole kitchen seemed to be swaying. When I felt a little steadier, I walked slowly, holding onto the furniture, to the little half-bath under the stairs. Every step was an agony. When I got there, I reached out a trembling hand and flipped on the light. And then, I looked in the mirror. The yellow light was merciless. The woman staring back at me was broken. My gray hair, which I always keep in a neat bun, was loose and disheveled, strands stuck to the sweat on my forehead. My face. My left cheek was red and swollen, and the skin around my eye was already starting to darken, a nasty purple bruise forming. And my lip. It was split, puffy, the dried blood forming a dark crust in the corner of my mouth. I raised my hand and touched the bruised cheek with my fingertips. The skin was hot, tender, and as I touched it, I didn't just feel the physical pain. I felt the humiliation, the shame. That mark on my face wasn't just a bruise. It was the visible proof of my failure. The failure of a mother who didn't see the monster growing. The failure of a woman who let fear silence her. And it was right there, looking at that mark, that the sadness began to turn into something else. Something cold, hard, an anger. But it wasn't a hot, explosive anger like Jeremiah's. It was a cold, calculating anger. An anger that didn't scream. It whispered, and what it whispered was, never again. I turned on the cold water tap. I cupped my hands and splashed the icy water on my face, once, twice, 3 times. The water stung my cut lip, but it was a good pain. A pain that woke me up. I washed away the blood, the sweat, the tears. I dried my face with a small towel, patting gently at the sore area. And I looked in the mirror again. The broken woman was gone. The woman staring back now had steel in her eyes. There was pain in them, yes. A deep pain that might never go away. But there was no more fear. The fear had been burned away by that cold anger. In its place was resolve, a deadly calm. The calm of someone who has hit rock bottom and found that the ground was solid stone and you could push off of it to go back up. I thought about my options. I could do nothing. In the morning, I'd put on some makeup to hide the bruise. I'd say I fell. Jeremiah might apologize with that weepy, sorry little boy voice he used. I'd pretend to accept it. And we'd go back to our routine of walking on eggshells until the next explosion. And the next, and the next. Until when? Until he pushed me harder? Until my head hit a corner in a way that I didn't get up from? No, that option was dead and buried. I could pack a bag and leave. Call my sister Paulette in Atlanta, ask for shelter. Abandon my home, my memories, my life. Leave Jeremiah here to drown on his own in his bitterness and his liquor. But this house was mine. It was my sweat, my husband's sweat, that paid for it. Why should I be the one to run? I had done nothing wrong. I would not be the fugitive. So that only left the third option. The hardest one. The most painful one. The only one that felt like a real solution. The only one that could, maybe, save my life. And who knows, in some twisted, terrible way, his life too. I left the half bath. The kitchen was still a mess. My glasses were on the floor, near the rocking chair. I picked them up. One of the lenses was cracked. I put them on anyway. The crack in the lens seemed like a symbol of how I saw the world now. Everything was broken. I walked through the dark living room. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed louder now, marking the rhythm of my decision. I went to the phone, an old rotary phone that sits on a little table in the hall. But I didn't use it. I went to the kitchen and got the cordless phone, a more modern handset I bought a few years back. One with big backlit buttons, you know? One of those for older folks, to make dialing easier. I bought it because my fingers sometimes get stiff from arthritis. I never thought I'd be so grateful for those big buttons because my hands in that moment were shaking. Not from fear, but from a nervous determination. I took the phone into the dining room. I sat in my chair, at the head of the table, the same table where, in a few hours, everything would happen. I took a deep breath, and I made the first call. The night was still dark, but my mind had never been so clear. The plan began to form, piece by piece. It wasn't a plan for revenge. It was a plan for survival. I didn't want to destroy my son. I needed to stop the monster he'd become. And if to do that, I had to break his heart, and my own, into 1,000 pieces, then so be it. Some hearts need to be broken so the light can get in. I grabbed an item I'd thought about using earlier, but gave up on. A high-coverage concealer. I'd bought it online after seeing an ad that promised to cover any imperfection. It was from a fancy brand, in a little gold tube. I bought it thinking I'd hide my age spots, the dark circles from sleepless nights. When I looked in the mirror after the assault, my first instinct was to think, tomorrow, I'm going to need a lot of this. But now, looking at the little gold tube in my hand, I threw it in the drawer with force. No more covering up, no more hiding. The truth, as ugly as it was, needed to be seen. The world needed to see it. And more importantly, Jeremiah needed to face, in the light of day, the mark he had left on me. The shame would no longer be mine alone. From that moment on, I was going to share it with him. I was sitting in the darkness of the dining room, the cordless phone heavy in my hand. The silence of the house was almost absolute, broken only by the steady sound of the rain and the electric hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I looked at the illuminated buttons on the handset. Each number seemed like a challenge. To dial meant to make it all real. It meant crossing a point of no return. For a second, the mother inside me, the one who gave birth, who nursed, who stayed up all night with fevers, hesitated. A weak voice whispered in the back of my mind, "That's your boy, Gwen, your only child. You can't do this to him." But then, the pain in my head throbbed, sharp, and the taste of blood returned to my mouth. The hesitation vanished like smoke. That man upstairs, snoring in the room I'd so lovingly decorated, was not my boy anymore. My boy wouldn't throw me against a cabinet. My boy wouldn't raise a hand to me. That man was a dangerous stranger, and I needed to protect myself from him. I took a deep breath and dialed the first number. My fingers trembled a bit, but I dialed with a firm press. The sound of the ringing, that re, sounded absurdly loud in the quiet house. It was almost 4 a.m. I was calling to wake up a 73-year-old retired federal judge. On the other end, on the third ring, a sleepy but instantly sharp and authoritative voice answered. "Hello? Bernice? It's me, Gwen. I'm so sorry to call at this hour, my dear." There was a pause. I heard her stirring, the sound of fabric. The sleepiness in her voice vanished, replaced by immediate concern. "Gwendolyn? For heaven's sake, what's happened? Are you all right? Is it Jeremiah?" Mrs. Bernice Johnson, my neighbor for over 40 years. We'd watched our children grow up together, buried our husbands within months of each other, shared countless cups of tea on the porch. But Bernice was more than a friend. Before she retired, she was one of the most respected judges in Georgia. A black woman who broke barriers, who faced the system and won. Her mind was as sharp as a razor, and her presence commanded a respect few people could. If there was anyone in the world who would understand the complexity of my situation, the mix of love and terror, it would be her. I swallowed hard. The shame burned my throat. I need you, Bernice. It happened again. But this time, it was worse. I didn't need to say anything else. I heard her sigh on the other end. A heavy sigh, not of surprise, but of deep sadness, of confirmation. "Did he hurt you, Gwen?" The tears welled up in my eyes again, but my voice stayed steady. "Yes." "Call the police," she said without hesitation. It wasn't a question. It was a command. "I'm going to," I answered. "But first, I need to ask you something. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you come over for breakfast? At 8 o'clock sharp?" Another pause. I could almost feel the gears of that brilliant mind turning. She didn't ask why I wanted to serve breakfast in a situation like this. She understood. She understood this wasn't about food. It was about bearing witness. It was about authority. "Gwen, I'm not coming for breakfast." Her voice turned hard as steel. "I'm coming to hold court. Where is your boy now?" "Sleeping, drunk, in his room," I whispered. "Good," she said. "Let him sleep. Don't talk to him. Don't make a sound. Just do what you have to do. I'll be there at 8. And Gwen." "Yes?" "You're doing the right thing, the hardest and the rightest thing. I'm proud of you." When she hung up, I felt a wave of relief so strong my legs went weak. I wasn't alone anymore. The cavalry was coming, and my cavalry wore an impeccable pantsuit and had the U.S. Constitution memorized. I took a deep breath, gathered my strength, and dialed the second number. The Savannah Police Department. A tired night shift operator answered. "Savannah PD, what's your emergency?" "It's not exactly an emergency," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and even. "My name is Gwendolyn Hayes. I'd like to speak with Detective David Miller if possible." Ma'am, it's 4:30 in the morning. Detective Miller is off duty. I know, I insisted, with a firmness that surprised even myself. We attend the same church, First Baptist. Please, I need you to contact him. It's regarding a domestic violence situation. I'm the victim. The shift in the operator's tone was immediate. The bureaucracy gave way to urgency. One moment, ma'am. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. Detective David, a good man, a deacon at our church. He'd known Jeremiah since he was a boy in the choir. He'd watched Jeremiah grow, watched him become a man. But he was also a cop, a man of the law. I wasn't calling Brother David, the deacon. I was calling Detective Miller, the officer, and I needed him to act like one. After a few minutes that felt like hours, David's deep, familiar voice came on the line, thick with sleep and concern. Sister Gwen, what's going on? Are you safe? And then, for the second time that night, I had to tell it. I had to put my shame into words. David, Jeremiah, he assaulted me. He came home drunk and he hit me. My voice broke on the last word. I heard a rustling sound in the background, like he was getting out of bed, pulling on clothes in a hurry. Where is he now, Sister Gwen? Is he still there? Do you need me to send a car right now? No, I said too quickly. He's sleeping. I'm safe for now. David, I don't want them to come now. I don't want a scene in the middle of the night with sirens and lights waking up the whole neighborhood. I want to do this my way, with dignity. He was silent, processing. I knew I was asking for something outside of protocol. I have a plan, I continued. Mrs. Bernice Johnson will be here at 8 in the morning. I want you to come too, David. You and 2 other officers. I want you to walk in, sit down, and we're going to handle this like civilized people. Before you take him. David sighed, a sigh of a man torn between his duty and his affection for my family. Sister Gwen, that's highly irregular. I know it is, David, but you know me. You know Jeremiah. You know if a squad car shows up here with sirens blazing, he'll react badly. He'll fight, he'll scream. It'll turn into a circus. I don't want that. I want him to look me in the eye. I want him to look Mrs. Bernice in the eye. And I want him to look you in the eye, David. I want him to understand what he's done. I don't want him to be just another drunk being dragged out of his house. I want him to feel the weight of his community's disappointment. Do you understand? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I understand, Sister Gwen. 8 o'clock sharp. We'll be there. Just lock yourself in your room to be safe. And if he wakes up, if he tries anything, you call me immediately. Understood? Understood, David. And thank you. God bless you, Sister Gwen, he said, and hung up. 2 calls made, 1 to go, the most personal one. I dialed the area code for Atlanta. My sister, Paulette. She picked up on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. Gwen? I felt it. I knew it was you. What did he do? Paulette and I always had that connection. She knew. She always knew. I told her everything. The broken vase, the yelling, the shove, the slap. She listened in silence, with just the sound of her breathing on the other end of the line. When I finished, she didn't say, I told you so. She didn't say, you should have left a long time ago. She just said, her voice thick with anger and love, what are you going to do? I've called Bernice and Detective David. They're coming at 8, I said, my voice now sounding exhausted. I'm turning him in, Paulette. A sob escaped her. Oh, Gwen, my dear sister, I'm so sorry. I know, I said. I wanted you to know. I wanted someone in our family to know what I'm doing, so that, if I ever doubt myself, you can remind me of today, of this night. I'll remember, she promised. I'm getting the first bus to Savannah in the morning. I'll be there by the afternoon. Thank you. Take care of yourself, Gwen, and know this. You are the strongest woman I know. I hung up the phone. I placed the handset back in its cradle. The 3 calls were made. The 3 pillars of my plan were in place. Moral authority, the law, and family. I felt a deep weariness, an exhaustion that came from the soul. But at the same time, I felt light, as if a 2-ton weight had been lifted off my back. The weight of silence. I looked at the clock. Almost 6 in the morning. The sky outside was beginning to lighten, from a deep black to a bruised bluish gray. The storm had passed. I had 2 hours. 2 hours to finish preparing breakfast. 2 hours to get myself ready. 2 hours to prepare for the final battle. I went to the kitchen and started making the peach preserves. Justice, after all, was going to be served, and it would have a bittersweet taste. The gray morning light started to filter through the kitchen windows, revealing the silent chaos of my vigil. There was a dusting of flour on the floor, dirty bowls in the sink, and the sweet, heavy smell of biscuits hanging in the air. The sky outside was pale, washed clean by the night's rain. It was the calm after the storm, and I felt that same calm inside me. A strange, cold calm, but an unshakable one. The exhaustion weighed on my shoulders like a shroud, but my mind was sharper than ever. Less than 2 hours to go. I needed to finish setting the stage. It wasn't enough to just have law and order on my side. Jeremiah needed to understand what he was losing. He needed to see, in a concrete way, the home he was destroying, the mother he was throwing away. His punishment wouldn't just be legal. It had to be visual, emotional. I started cleaning the kitchen with a renewed energy. I washed the dishes, scrubbing each plate and bowl with a force like I was scouring the filth from my own soul. I dried everything and put it away. I wiped the flour from the counter and the floor. The kitchen, in 20 minutes, was spotless, gleaming in the morning light, as if the violence and despair of the night had never happened. It was a facade, a beautiful, orderly facade, just like the life I had been leading for the past 2 years. Then I turned to the food. The biscuits were already done, dozens of them, piled on a white ceramic platter. I went to the pantry and got a can of peaches and syrup. I opened it and poured the contents into a saucepan, adding some brown sugar, a dash of cinnamon, and some freshly grated nutmeg. As the peaches bubbled on the stove, the sweet and spicy aroma mixed with the buttery smell of the biscuits. It was the smell of Jeremiah's childhood. When he was a boy and got sick, I'd make him these same preserves to eat with toast. He used to call it his sweet medicine. The irony of it. I was preparing the most bitter medicine of his life, and he didn't even know it. While the preserves thickened, I put a large pot of water and salt on to boil for the grits. Creamy grits with plenty of butter and a little bit of sharp cheddar stirred in at the end. Soul food. Food for the soul. But right then, it felt more like food for a condemned man. A last meal. As the water boiled, I focused on an important detail. The knives. I had a set of kitchen knives Robert had given me for a birthday many years ago. But last year, the wooden handle on my favorite chef's knife had cracked. Paulette, always paying attention, sent me a new set as a gift. It was from some German brand, high-quality steel, and they came in a heavy wooden block. "So you can chop your collards easier, sis," she'd joked. I kept them razor-sharp. I took the paring knife from that block. The blade gleamed. I used it to slice some fresh fruit to garnish the table. Strawberries, cantaloupe. Every cut was precise, clean. I moved with the skill of a woman who'd spent her life in the kitchen. But that morning, there was something else in my movements. A surgical precision, like a doctor preparing for a delicate operation on which a patient's life depended. And in a way, my life depended on what was about to happen. With the food almost ready, it was time to set the table. I went to the china cabinet, the very one I'd been thrown against. I ran my hand over the dark wood, feeling the solid texture, the history in it. I opened the glass doors carefully. The smell of old wood and beeswax filled my senses. Inside was my heritage, my wedding china, my mother's crystal glasses. First, the tablecloth. I went to the linen closet in the hall and took out my best one. White, pure linen, with a delicate lace trim handmade by my grandmother. I used it so rarely, it still smelled of the lavender sachets I kept with it. I spread it over the dining room table. The stark white fabric covered the dark wood, creating a shocking contrast. A blank canvas for the scene that was to come. Then, the china. I went back to the cabinet and with reverent care took out the dinner set. Plates, saucers, cups. Each piece was white with a thin gold rim and tiny hand-painted blue flowers. I washed them in the sink, one by one, to get any dust off, and dried them with a soft cloth. I set 4 places at the table. One at the head, for me. One to my right, for Mrs. Bernice, one to my left for Detective David, and one at the other end, facing me, Jeremiah's place. I placed the silver cutlery, which I had polished the week before, next to each plate. White linen napkins, ironed crisp, folded neatly. A small crystal vase with a single white camellia from my garden in the center of the table. The table was set for a king, or for a sacrifice. The line between the two, I was discovering, was very thin. Everything was ready. The food, the table. Now it was my turn. I went upstairs, the steps creaking under my feet. The upstairs hallway was dark and quiet. I walked past Jeremiah's door. I could hear him snoring, a heavy guttural sound. The sound of a man sleeping the sleep of the unaware, with no idea of the earthquake that was about to shatter his life. For a brief second, I felt a pang of pity, an almost overwhelming urge to open that door, to shake him, to scream, "Wake up, my son! Wake up before it's too late!" But I didn't. I took a deep breath and continued on to my room. I entered my sanctuary. My room was simple, tidy. The patchwork quilt I made myself was on the bed. The white lace curtains filtered the gray morning light. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the large mirror. The sight was still shocking. The bruise under my eye was darker now, an ugly smudge of blue and purple. My lip more swollen. I needed a shower. I needed to wash the smell of fear and flour from my body. I turned on the tub faucet and let the hot water run. I added some lavender bath salts, and the fragrant steam filled the bathroom. While the tub filled, I went to my closet. I didn't hesitate. I went straight to the back, where I kept the clothes I rarely wore, and I took out the dress. It was a Sunday dress made of crepe in a deep, almost navy blue. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and fell straight to my mid-calves. It was an elegant, sober dress, the kind of dress you wear to church or to a funeral, or, as I was about to find out, to a judgment. I took my bath. The hot water stung my bruised back, but also relaxed my tense muscles. I washed my hair, scrubbing my scalp hard. I tried not to think. I just focused on the sensations, the water, the soap, the steam. I got out, dried myself off, and put on the blue dress. It fit perfectly. I combed my wet hair and pinned it into a low, tight bun at the nape of my neck. I looked in the mirror again. The bruise and the cut lip stood out even more against my clean skin and the dark fabric of the dress. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wasn't going to hide a thing. My wounds were my witnesses. I sat at my vanity. I don't wear much makeup, just a little powder and some lipstick. But that morning, I made a point of it. I dusted my face with rice powder to take away the shine. And then, I opened the drawer and took out something I kept for special occasions. A belt. But not just any belt. It was a back support belt. One of those ones the doctors recommend, you know? A discreet one, skin-toned, to wear under my clothes. I'd bought it online some time ago for the days when my arthritis acted up real bad. I put it on under the dress, pulling it tight. It gave my back immediate support, easing the pain from the blow against the china cabinet and, more importantly, forcing me to keep my posture straight. I would not slouch. Not today. I looked at the clock on my bedside table. 7:40. It was almost time. I went downstairs. The house was filled with smells and a silent expectation. I poured the fresh coffee into a porcelain pot, the grits into a tureen, the preserves into a crystal bowl. I carried everything to the dining room table. Everything was perfect, dangerously perfect. I sat down in my chair at the head of the table. I smoothed the blue dress over my knees. My hands were calm now. My heart was beating in a steady, slow rhythm. I was ready. And that's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps upstairs, the creak of the floorboards in Jeremiah's room. He was awake. The guest of honor was about to come down for his feast. The sound of footsteps upstairs was unmistakable. First, the groan of the bed, a heavy, lazy sound. Then, the shuffling of feet on the wood floor. I knew that routine by heart. It was the sound of a hangover, the sound of a man moving through a fog of headache and shallow regret. I stayed seated, motionless, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the texture of my dress. My heart didn't speed up. My breathing didn't change. I was the picture of serenity, a calm statue sitting at the head of a war table. I heard the water run in the upstairs bathroom, a quick shower. He always did that, as if water could wash away not just the grime from his body, but the filth from his soul. Foolish man. His filth was bone deep. The footsteps started again, now coming down the stairs. One step at a time, heavy, deliberate. The staircase in our house is old, solid wood, and each step has its own unique groan. I knew them like I knew the notes of a hymn. I could tell, just by the sound, where he was, halfway down, 3 steps to go, now in the front hall. There was a pause. I knew what he was seeing, the hall table and the broken shards of my blue ceramic vase on the floor. I hadn't cleaned it up. I'd left it on purpose. I wanted it to be the first thing he saw, the physical evidence of his nighttime rage. I had hoped it might bring him a sliver of shame, of remorse, but what I heard next wasn't a sigh of regret. It was a huff, a sound of disdain. And then I heard the sound of the shards being kicked into a corner with the toe of his shoe, carelessly, like it was just trash. In that moment, any lingering shred of pity I might have had for him evaporated. All that was left was the coldness of my resolve. And then he appeared in the dining room doorway. He stood there, his hand on the doorframe, and blinked, adjusting to the light. The morning sun, still weak, was streaming through the large window, illuminating the set table. He was dressed in wrinkled khaki pants and a polo shirt that had seen better days. His hair was still damp from the shower, but his face was puffy, his eyes red and small. The stubble on his chin gave him an air of slovenliness, of defeat. He took in the scene. The white lace tablecloth, the fine china, the gleaming silver cutlery, the steaming platters of food, the smell of coffee, biscuits, peach, and cinnamon. He scanned it all, and a look of confusion settled on his face. He was expecting yelling, accusations, or at best, my silent treatment, my contempt. He wasn't prepared for this unexplainable celebration. He looked at me, and for the first time that morning, he seemed to really notice my face. I saw his eyes fix for a second on my swollen lip, on the bruise blooming on my cheek. But his reaction wasn't shock or guilt. It was an almost imperceptible twitch of his lips, a glimmer of satisfaction, of power. And then, the confusion on his face morphed into something else. Arrogance. A slow, crooked smile spread across his face. He had read it all wrong. In his sick mind, this feast wasn't a trap. It was a peace offering, a white flag. In his mind, the slap from the night before had worked. He had finally tamed me. He had put me in my place. And now, like a good, submissive mother, I was pleasing him, apologizing with food. The sight was so absurd, so twisted from reality, that I almost would have laughed if it wasn't so tragic. "Well, well," he said, his voice still hoarse from the hangover. He straightened up, puffing out his chest, and walked to the table like a king surveying his domain. "To what do I owe the honor of this grand banquet?" I didn't answer. I just watched him, keeping my expression neutral. My silence seemed to amuse him even more. He pulled out his chair, the one at the opposite end from me, and threw himself into it with a thud. He picked up a linen napkin, looked at it with a fake air of sophistication, and tossed it in his lap. Then he reached out and took a biscuit from the basket, the most perfect one, the most golden one of all. He held it up for a moment. "I gotta admit, Mom, nobody makes biscuits like you." And then he took a huge bite. He ate with his mouth open, without any manners, crumbs falling from his mouth onto the pristine tablecloth. He chewed loudly, and after he swallowed, he pointed what was left of the biscuit at me. "There you go, Mom," he said, his voice full of that cruel victory. "See, you finally figured out who's in charge around here, huh? A little discipline, and things fall right back into place. That's how it's gotta be." His words hit me, but I didn't show it. On the outside, I was a statue of ice. On the inside, every word he spoke was another nail in the coffin of my old life. He felt no remorse. He felt pride. Pride in having hurt me. Pride in having humiliated me. He believed violence was the answer. I just stared at him from across the table. The silence stretched. He shrugged and picked up his coffee cup. He was about to pour himself some when the sound cut through the air. Ding-dong. The sound of the doorbell. Sharp, clear, punctual. Jeremiah stopped, his hand hovering over the coffee pot. A scowl of irritation formed on his forehead. "Who the hell is it at this time of morning? Did you invite someone?" "Yes," I said, and it was the first word I had spoken that morning. My voice came out calm, steady. "I did." "You what?" he growled, slamming the cup down on its saucer. "I don't want to see anyone. Send them away, whoever it is." I ignored his command. With a slow, deliberate movement, I placed my hands on the table, pushed myself up, and stood. I smoothed the front of my blue dress, and I walked, without hurrying, out of the dining room and toward the front hall. "Mom, didn't you hear me? I said, send them away." His voice followed me, full of anger at my disobedience. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. My Sunday shoes made a soft sound on the wood floor. I reached the front door. I took one last deep breath. I looked at my distorted reflection in the glass of the door. I saw the woman in blue, with the bruised face and the posture of a queen. It was time. I turned the brass knob and pulled the door open. The Savannah morning air drifted in, fresh and damp. On my porch stood the three people I was expecting. Mrs. Bernice Johnson, immaculate in her peach-colored linen suit, wearing a string of pearls and a serious expression that would make any lawyer tremble. Beside her, Detective David Miller, tall and imposing in his uniform, his cap held in his hand, his face grim with concern and duty. And behind him, two younger officers, both with professional, neutral expressions. I looked at Bernice. She looked at my face, at my lip, at my eye. I saw a flash of fury in her eyes, but she controlled it instantly. She just gave me a nod, an almost imperceptible movement. But it said everything. "I'm here. We're here." "Good morning, Gwendolyn," she said, her voice as firm as a judge's in a courtroom. "Good morning, Bernice." "Detective," I said, my voice just as steady. "Please, come in. The coffee is served." I stepped back from the door, holding it open for them. They entered in silence, one by one. Their presence filled my small hallway. Authority, the law. They walked behind me, toward the dining room. Jeremiah, who had gotten up, annoyed, to see what was going on, was standing in the doorway of the room. And that's when his world fell apart. When he saw the group walking in, when he saw Mrs. Bernice with her courtroom air, when he saw the uniform on Detective David and the other two officers, his jaw dropped. The arrogance melted away like sugar in the rain. His face went from annoyed to confused, and from confused to the purest, most absolute panic. The color drained from his skin, leaving behind that sickly grayish tone of sheer fear. His wide eyes jumped from me to them and back to me. He opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. His hand, which was still holding a piece of the biscuit, went limp, and the biscuit fell. It hit the china plate with a dry clink, then rolled onto the floor, breaking into crumbs. A tiny sound, the sound of the end of his reign. The silence in the dining room was so thick it felt like it had weight. The only sound was the slow, steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the next room, each second marking Jeremiah's agony. He was frozen in place, his face a gray mask of terror. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted from one face to another like a cornered animal looking for an escape route where there was none. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw in his eyes not anger or contempt, but a terrified question. "Mom, what have you done?" I didn't have to answer. Mrs. Bernice Johnson did it for me with her actions. With a calm that was both terrifying and magnificent, she took a step forward. She completely ignored Jeremiah's presence, as if he were an unimportant piece of furniture. She walked with her usual elegance to the dining room table. Her low-heeled shoes made a soft, determined sound on the wood floor. She didn't go to the place I had set for her, to my right. No, she went straight to the chair at the head of the table, facing me. The chair Jeremiah had just abandoned. The chair that, by right and tradition, belonged to the head of the family, my Robert's chair. She pulled out the heavy wooden chair with a smooth movement, the scraping sound echoing in the room. She sat down. She straightened the jacket of her linen suit. She placed her leather purse on the floor beside her. And then she looked at Jeremiah. just looked. There was no anger in her gaze, no pity. There was only the weight of 60 years of friendship with me and the weight of a lifetime spent upholding the law. It was a look that stripped the soul bare. Under that gaze, Jeremiah seemed to shrink. The big, imposing man who had thrown me against the wall hours before now looked like an awkward, frightened boy, lost in a grown-up's living room. Detective David and the other 2 officers remained standing in the doorway, positioned strategically. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Their presence, the dark blue uniforms, the belts with their holstered weapons, it all spoke for itself. They were the consequence. The physical and legal answer to the violence of the night. Mrs. Bernice, still without taking her eyes off my son, reached out and took the porcelain coffee pot. "This coffee smells wonderful, Gwendolyn," she said, her voice calm and velvety, as if she were commenting on the weather at an afternoon tea. She poured herself a cup, the dark steaming liquid filling the white china. She took the small cream pitcher and added a drop. She stirred the coffee with a silver spoon, the gentle clinking of metal against porcelain cutting through the tension. She took a sip, and then she placed the cup back on its saucer with calculated delicacy. Finally, she spoke to Jeremiah. "Jeremiah," she began, and her voice was low, but it carried an authority that filled every corner of the room. "I remember when you were just a little boy. You used to come running to my fence, a dandelion in your hand, and say, 'Look, Aunt Bernice, a flower for you.'" Jeremiah swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. "I remember," she continued, "you carrying my grocery bags from the market, even when they were almost bigger than you were. You were such a polite boy, so kind. Let me get that, Aunt Bernice. You shouldn't be straining yourself. That's what you always used to say." She paused, taking another sip of coffee. Every word she spoke was a small blow, a reminder of the man he should have been, in stark contrast to the man he had become. It wasn't an accusation. It was a eulogy. "Your father," she said, and Robert's name seemed to hang in the air, "would have been so proud of that boy. The boy who became a man, went to college, the first in the family, the pride of our community, the pride of his mother." She paused and glanced at me. Then her eyes returned to Jeremiah, and the softness in her voice was gone, replaced by a blade of steel. "Where did he go, Jeremiah? Where is that man?" Jeremiah opened his mouth. A hoarse sound, a groan, escaped. "Aunt Bernice, I don't know what you're talking about. This is just, a family misunderstanding." It was the wrong thing to say. Mrs. Bernice's eyes narrowed. "A family misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice dripping with irony. She gestured with her chin in my direction. "Look at your mother's face, Jeremiah. Look closely. That on her lip, the bruise forming under her eye. Does that look like a misunderstanding to you?" He couldn't look. His eyes fell to the floor, to the crumbs of the biscuit he had dropped. "No." Mrs. Bernice's voice was sharp now. "That has a name, and we both know what it is." That was Detective David's cue. He stepped forward, pulling a small notepad from his uniform pocket. His presence was imposing. He looked at Jeremiah with an expression of profound disappointment. "Jeremiah Hayes," David said, his voice grave and official, without the warmth of Brother David from church. "We've received multiple complaints of disturbing the peace from your neighbors over the last 6 months. Loud noise, late-night music, shouting." Jeremiah hunched his shoulders, still staring at the floor. "We also have a record," the detective continued, flipping a page in his notepad, "of an altercation at the Salty Dog Bar 3 weeks ago. You were involved in a fight and had to be restrained by security. You were released with a warning." Jeremiah's head came up a little, surprised that he knew about that. "And we have 2 reports, not yet confirmed by a traffic stop, of you driving recklessly after leaving said bar. In short, Jeremiah, you've been on our radar." David paused, and his gaze grew even more serious. "And then this morning, at 4:37 a.m., I received a phone call, a domestic assault complaint, from this address. The victim, your mother, Gwendolyn Hayes." Every word from the detective was a nail being hammered. The list of his failures, his transgressions, being read aloud in his childhood dining room, in front of the woman who was a second mother to him. The humiliation was palpable. The air was thick with it. I stood up. All eyes turned to me. My back was aching, but the back support belt I'd put on under my dress kept me upright. I would not falter. Not now. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing next to Mrs. Bernice's chair. I placed my hand on her shoulder, and I felt the solidity, the support. And then I looked at my son. Not at the floor, not at the wall. Straight into his eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, I was the one who made him look away. "Jeremiah," I began. My voice was calm, but there was no warmth in it. It was the voice of a woman who had walked through hell during the night and come out the other side. I needed him to understand. This wasn't about hate. It was about something much more complicated. I'd put on lipstick before coming downstairs. A wine-colored lipstick, real dark, with a matte finish. My niece had sent it to me as a gift. She said it was long-lasting, that it wouldn't even come off if you drank water. I put it on that morning for a reason. I didn't want them to see my lips tremble. I wanted my mouth to be firm, strong, when I delivered his sentence. "I didn't call them here out of hate, Jeremiah," I said, the color of the lipstick making every word stand out. "I called them because I love you." He snorted, a sound of scorn. "You love me? You call the cops on someone you love?" "Sometimes," I replied, without blinking. "Sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. It's delivering them to them." The room fell silent again. The only thing moving was the steam rising from the coffee cups, like souls ascending to heaven. The trap was set. The witnesses were in place. The law was present. And now, it was the victim's time to speak. Jeremiah's scornful laugh hung in the air for a second, thin and brittle, before it died under the weight of my gaze. "You call this love?" he repeated, his voice rising an octave, bordering on hysterical. "This is betrayal. You're turning me over to strangers. This is a family matter, Mom. Our business." "No, Jeremiah." Mrs. Bernice's voice cut through the air, cold and precise as a scalpel. She didn't even bother to look at him. She continued to sip her coffee as if discussing a trivial matter of gardening. "It stopped being a family matter the moment you raised your hand to the woman who gave you life. At that instant, it became a community matter, a legal matter. And if I may say so," she finally set her cup down and fixed her eyes on him, "it became my matter." The power in those last words silenced Jeremiah instantly. Arguing with me was one thing. Arguing with Judge Bernice Johnson was something else entirely. He shut his mouth, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and fear. I remained standing next to Bernice, my hand still on her shoulder. I felt as if I were drawing her strength, her courage. I looked at my son, the frightened man-child across the table, and the torrent of words I had held back for 2 years finally found a way out. "A family matter," I repeated, my voice low, but every syllable weighted with pain. "You want to talk about family, Jeremiah? Let's talk. Family is your father, Robert, working from sunup to sundown at that port, his hands covered in calluses, his back aching, to make sure you had books for school and food on this very table. That's family." I took a step, moving around Bernice's chair, getting a little closer to him. "Family, my son, is me, after your father was gone, working as a seamstress until my fingers bled and then going to clean floors in an office downtown, coming home in the dead of night, just to make sure your college tuition was paid, to make sure you'd have a better future than we did. That's family." He shrank back in his chair, unable to meet my gaze. "And you?" I continued, my voice beginning to tremble, not with weakness, but with a righteous anger finally breaking free. "What did you do with this family? You took your father's sacrifice and my sacrifice, and you spat on it. You took the pain of your demotion, your frustration, your inability to deal with life's problems like a man, and you turned it into a weapon. And you aimed that weapon at me, the only person in the world who never, ever gave up on you." The tears began to stream down my face, but I didn't care. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, like liquid witnesses to my pain. Night after night, Jeremiah. Night after night, I sit in that kitchen and I pray. But my prayers have changed. I used to pray for your safety, for your success. Now I pray that you come home and go straight to bed without speaking to me. I pray that your poison won't touch me. I pray to be invisible in my own home. You have turned my home into a prison. You have turned my mother's love into a sentence. I didn't mean to hurt you," he stammered, finally looking up. There were tears in his eyes too, but they were the tears of self-pity. "I drank too much. I lost my head. It won't happen again, Mom, I swear. I swear to God." "Oh, no, no, no," I said, shaking my head slowly. "Don't you use God's name in this house. Not today. How many times have I heard that promise, Jeremiah? Huh? How many hungover mornings have you woken up crying, begging for my forgiveness? And I, like a fool, believed you. Every single time. I forgave you. I cleaned up your messes. I lied to the neighbors. I hid my tears. I protected you. And you know what my forgiveness did? You know what my protection did? I leaned over the table, my knuckles resting on the lace tablecloth. It gave you permission. My silence, my forgiveness, they told you it was okay, that you could yell, that you could break things, that you could humiliate me. And last night, they told you that you could hit me. The word hit hung in the air, ugly and irrefutable. "And you know what the worst part is, Jeremiah?" I went on, my voice now a hoarse whisper. "It wasn't the pain. The physical pain goes away. The bruise will fade. The lip will heal. The worst part was your silence afterward. The way you turned your back and went upstairs like you just stepped on a bug. Your total and complete lack of remorse. It was right there in your silence that I understood. I understood that I wasn't dealing with my son having a bad day anymore. I was dealing with a man who took pleasure in inflicting pain on someone weaker, and that person was me." I straightened up. I glanced at Detective David. His face was impassive, but I saw the pain in his eyes. He was a father of 2 girls. He understood. "I carried you for 9 months, Jeremiah," I said, turning my gaze back to my son. "I raised you. I gave you my life, and my mother's love is the strongest thing I have. But my love does not require me to be your punching bag. My love does not require me to be an accomplice to your destruction. And protecting you from yourself at this point is exactly that. It's helping you destroy yourself and taking me down with you." He started to cry for real now. Loud, childish sobs. "Mom, please, don't do this. I'll go to rehab. I'll stop drinking. I'll go back to church. Anything. But don't let them take me, please. It's a family matter." "The law is clear on domestic assault, Jeremiah," Detective David's voice sounded, calm but final. "It's not something we can ignore." "What will the neighbors say?" he whimpered, in a last, pathetic attempt to appeal to my shame. And that's when I picked up my watch, a gold wristwatch, small and delicate, that used to be my Robert's. I wore it every day. I looked at the time, 8:15. I looked at him and said, "I don't care what the neighbors will say anymore. I've spent the last 2 years caring about that, and look where we are. From today on, I only care about one thing, my peace. And my peace, Jeremiah, begins with your absence from this house." I sat down in my chair again. I picked up my linen napkin, and with perfectly steady hands, I served myself a spoonful of grits. I wasn't going to eat, not really. My stomach was a knot of anguish. But the act was symbolic. I was taking back my life, my table, my house. Mrs. Bernice, seeing my gesture, nodded slowly. She turned to Jeremiah, his face a mess of tears and snot. "Your tears don't move me, boy," she said, her voice without a shred of sympathy. "An abuser's tears are always about himself, never about the pain he's caused. Your mother, by doing this, is giving you the only chance you have, the chance to face the man in the mirror, without the excuse of the bottle, without the shield of her easy forgiveness. She is forcing you to grow up. And that, Jeremiah, is the greatest, most painful, and truest act of love you will ever receive." She turned to Detective David and gave a slight nod of her head. It was the signal. The trial at the dining room table was over. The sentence was about to be carried out. Mrs. Bernice's nod was almost imperceptible, but to Detective David, it was as clear as the sound of a judge's gavel. He put his notepad away in his uniform pocket, and the small gesture marked the end of the conversation and the beginning of the action. He took a step forward, fully entering the dining room. The younger officer, who had been posted near the door, followed him. The air in the room, which was already heavy, became thin. I felt my chest tighten. It was real. It was happening. Jeremiah. Detective David's voice was formal, devoid of any warmth. He was no longer Brother David from church. He was the law. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back. Jeremiah's crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a look of panic and disbelief. He looked from David to me, and back to David. You can't be serious, he stammered. David, for God's sake, you've known me since I was a kid. You saw me get baptized, and you're going to arrest me? In my own house? In front of my mother? I'm arresting you because of your mother, Jeremiah, David replied, his voice firm, unwavering. And because the law requires me to. Now please, don't make this any harder than it already is. The second officer moved up behind Jeremiah's chair. The movement was what finally seemed to break my son's trance. The panic turned to rage. He shoved his chair back with a loud bang and jumped to his feet, his face red with anger. Don't you touch me, he yelled, pointing a finger at the officer. This is absurd. It's a family matter. She's my mother. We fight sometimes. Everybody fights. He turned to me, his eyes pleading and furious at the same time. Mom, tell them to stop. It was just an argument. I lost my head. Tell them you don't want to press charges. Everyone in the room looked at me. His question hung in the air. The last chance for me to back down, to go back to being the protective mother, the fearful woman. For a second, my heart faltered. To see my son, my baby, in this situation, cornered, desperate. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to endure. I was holding a scarf in my hand, a silk scarf with a magnolia print that Robert had given me. I had grabbed it from my dresser before coming downstairs, anticipating tears, and now I was clutching it so tightly in my hand that my knuckles were white. The thin fabric was soaked, not with the tears I'd shed, but with the ones I'd held back. I looked at Jeremiah, at his contorted face, and I found my voice. I've said everything I have to say, Jeremiah. My voice came out low but clear. I'm not going to lie for you. Not anymore. Those words were the final sentence. Jeremiah's face crumbled. The anger gave way to abject despair. He seemed to deflate, as if his spine had been removed. He knew he had lost. Please, he whispered, his voice broken. Don't do this. Detective David didn't wait any longer. With a swift, practiced move, he took Jeremiah's arm and turned him around. The younger officer took the other hand. And then I heard the sound. The metallic, dry sound of steel teeth locking together. Click. The sound of handcuffs. The sound of freedom for me. And the sound of rock bottom for him. Jeremiah let out a sob, a guttural sound of pure defeat. He didn't resist anymore. He just stood there, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped, as Detective David read him his rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The detective's voice was a monotone drone, the familiar litany I'd only ever heard in movies and on television. To hear it in my own dining room, being read to my own son, was surreal. Mrs. Bernice didn't move. She remained seated, a silent and regal witness, her presence an anchor of dignity in the chaos of my life. She was the proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't overreacting. They started to escort him out of the room. As Jeremiah passed by me, he stopped for an instant. He lifted his head and looked me in the eye. His face was wet with tears. Mama, he began. I thought he was going to apologize. But no, you're going to regret this, Mama, he said, his voice low, full of a poison that chilled my blood. You're going to be all alone in this old house, with your old junk, and you're going to regret it. It was a threat, the last attempt of a tyrant to maintain control through fear. But the fear in me had died that morning. I met his gaze without flinching. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing but a deep, abysmal sadness and pity for the weak man he had become. Maybe, Jeremiah, I replied, my voice steady, without a hint of hesitation. Maybe I'll regret that it had to come to this, but I will never, ever regret choosing my own life today. Detective David gently pulled him by the arm, and they continued walking. I watched them as they crossed the front hall. The other officer opened the front door. The bright morning sun flooded the hallway, making me blink. I didn't go to the door. I didn't want to see the curious neighbors peering out their windows. I didn't want to see the look on my son's face as he was put into a police car. I stood just inside my dining room and just listened. I heard their footsteps on the wooden porch. I heard Detective David's voice saying something to him. And then I heard the sound of the police car door slamming shut, a hollow, final sound. And then the sound of the engine starting and driving away until it faded into the distance. And then the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of the early morning. It was a light silence. Empty, yes. Painful, without a doubt. But light. It was the silence of peace. The silence of a house that no longer held fear. I just stood there for I don't know how long. My muscles, which had been tense for hours, began to relax. The adrenaline that had kept me on my feet started to dissipate, and a wave of exhaustion, so overwhelming, hit me. My knees buckled. Before I could fall, I felt a firm hand on my arm. It was Mrs. Bernice. She had gotten up and come to me. She held me steady, and the other officer, the one who had stayed behind, came over and pulled out a chair for me. Bernice helped me sit down. "It's over, Gwen," she said, her voice soft for the first time that morning. "It's over." And it was only then, sitting there in my dining room, with the smell of coffee and biscuits still in the air, with my best friend beside me, that I allowed myself to fall apart. I covered my face with my hands, and I wept. I wept for the loss of my son, for the shame, for the pain. I wept for the boy he once was, and the man he never became. I wept for the loneliness that lay ahead of me, and I wept too, for the terrifying relief of being finally, and absolutely, free. The days that followed Jeremiah's arrest were the strangest of my life. The house suddenly felt enormous, cavernous. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the clock, echoed in the emptiness he'd left behind. At first, I kept expecting to run into him around a corner. I'd expect to hear his heavy footsteps on the stairs, the sound of the TV turned up too loud on the sports channel. But there was nothing. Just silence. A silence that, for the first few days, was as deafening as his yelling had been. Mrs. Bernice and my sister Paulette, who arrived from Atlanta that same afternoon, formed a one-woman army around me. Paulette cleaned up the mess in the kitchen, picking up the shards of my ceramic vase with a look of quiet fury. "I'll glue every piece back together, Gwen," she said. "But some things, once they're broken, are never the same." I knew she wasn't just talking about the vase. Bernice, for her part, handled the outside world. She spoke to the neighbors with a short, dignified version of the facts, cutting off any gossip at the root. Jeremiah is unwell and required a serious intervention. Gwendolyn was brave and did what had to be done. The family asks for privacy and prayers. The word of a retired federal judge, my dear, carries more weight than any porch gossip. They made me eat. Paulette made my favorite soups. Bernice brought over slices of sweet potato pie. But the food had no taste. I felt numb, like I was floating outside my own body, watching some sad old woman move through her house. The hardest part was the nights. Lying in my bed, in the absolute quiet of the upstairs, knowing that the room next door, my son's room, was empty. I would imagine where he was. In a cold cell at the county jail. With strangers. With criminals. The mother in me would scream. I felt like a traitor. I had nightmares. I dreamt he was a little boy again, crying behind bars, and I couldn't reach him. I woke up several times with my face wet with tears. It was Bernice who, on the third day, sat with me on the porch and gave me the harshest medicine. "Gwendolyn, stop," she said, her voice firm but not without compassion. "Stop torturing yourself. You didn't put him there. His choices put him there. The liquor put him there. His anger put him there. You just opened the door so the consequences could walk in. And you only did that when your own life was at risk." She was right. I knew she was. But a mother's heart doesn't run on logic. It runs on a stubborn, sometimes blind, love. That same week, I took the first step for my own safety. I'd always been a woman who felt safe in her home, never even locked my doors during the day. But Jeremiah's threat at the door, "You're going to regret this," had lodged itself in the back of my mind. I called a company I saw advertised online and had a security system put in. Little, discreet cameras on the front and back porches, and an alarm with sensors on the doors and windows. The young technician who came to install it was very kind. He showed me how to arm and disarm the system with a small keypad by the door. The first night I pressed the buttons and heard the soft beep confirming the house was locked down. I breathed a little deeper. It was a small bit of control, but it was my control. My sense of security was no longer something that depended on someone else's mood. The second step was at the suggestion of Reverend Michael from our church. He came to visit, brought me a book of Psalms, and talked with me for a long time. "Sister Gwen," he said, "the body heals, but the soul needs a different kind of doctor." He gave me the card of a therapist, a Dr. Simone Dubois, a black woman specializing in family trauma in the community. I hesitated. In my generation, we didn't do therapy. We talked to God, to our pastor, to our friends. But the world had changed, and I needed more help than the hymnal could give me. My first session with Dr. Simone was terrifying. I sat in her calm office with its comfortable chairs and the smell of chamomile tea in the air, and I couldn't speak. The shame was a lump in my throat. But she was patient. She didn't push. She just sat there, with me, in my silence, until finally I started to cry. And after I cried, I started to talk. And I talked for a solid hour without stopping. I talked about my fear, my guilt, my love, my anger, and she listened. For the first time, I felt like someone was hearing me without judging me. As I began my stumbling path to healing, Jeremiah was starting his. Because of the complaint and my testimony, he was charged with assault. His history of disturbing the peace didn't help him. Bernice explained that, for a first violence offense, he likely wouldn't get a long prison sentence, but that the court would almost certainly order him into a mandatory rehab program for alcohol and anger management. And that's exactly what happened. He stayed in the county jail for 3 weeks, awaiting his hearing. And it was during that time that the letter arrived. It was a plain white envelope from the county jail. My name and address were written in his handwriting, which I'd know anywhere. My hands trembled as I took it from the mailbox. I sat in my rocking chair on the porch to read it. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders. I opened the envelope carefully. The letter was short, written on a sheet of lined paper. "Mom," it began, "I don't really know how to start this. I guess 'I'm sorry' isn't enough. I've said and done unforgivable things. I know that now. These past 3 weeks in here, sober, with nothing to distract me, they've been the longest and clearest of my life. I've had to look at the man I've become, and I didn't like what I saw. I saw a bitter, weak man who blamed everyone for his problems, especially the one person who loved him most. I don't remember everything from that night, but I remember enough, and the image of your face, the fear in your eyes. I'll never forget that. I hate myself for causing you that. When they put the cuffs on me, I hated you. I blamed you. But in here, in this quiet, I understood. You didn't do that to me. You did that for me. You hit the emergency button because the plane was going down and I was too busy fighting with the flight attendant. You stopped me. And maybe, as crazy as it sounds, you saved my life. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand. Thank you for having the courage I didn't have. Jeremiah. I read the letter 2-3 times. The tears ran down my face and dripped onto the paper, blurring the ink. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope? Relief? I don't quite know. It was the first time in over 2 years that I had heard my son's real voice. Not the voice of the drunken monster, but the voice of the man who was lost inside. The voice of the boy who once promised me he'd make his father proud. He still had a long road ahead. The court sentenced him to 6 months in an inpatient rehab program, followed by a year of probation and mandatory therapy. 6 months. It felt like an eternity. But for the first time, I felt there was a light at the end of the tunnel. A long, dark, scary tunnel. But there was a light. In the months that followed, I focused on myself. I continued my therapy with Dr. Simone. I rejoined the church sewing circle. I started having Mrs. Bernice over for tea again. Slowly, my house started to feel like a home again, not a prison. The silence was no longer scary. It was peaceful. I bought a tablet, one of those with a big screen and a nice leather case. I learned how to use it to read my books, to watch the news, to video call with Paulette. The world, which had shrunk to the size of my house, started to expand again. And then, 6 months later, the phone rang. It was a mediator from the rehab center. Jeremiah had successfully completed the program. He was sober. He was working a simple job, bagging groceries at a supermarket and living in a small rented apartment on the other side of town. And he was asking to see me, not at home, not alone, in a mediated session with a therapist present. My heart jumped. Fear, hope, doubt. It all swirled together. Was I ready? Did I want to see him? I looked around my living room, at the afternoon sun streaming through the window, at my houseplants, at the photos of my family. I was at peace. And the question I asked myself was, am I willing to risk this peace? The question echoed in my head for days. Was I willing to risk my peace? The peace I had fought so hard to win back, that I had built brick by brick on the ruins of my old life. The very idea of seeing Jeremiah again brought back a ghost of fear, a chill down my spine I had worked so hard to forget. I talked to Mrs. Bernice. She, practical as ever, said, "Gwendolyn, the decision is yours. But remember this, seeing him doesn't mean forgetting. Listening doesn't mean letting him back in. You can go, hear what he has to say, and keep your door and your heart locked just as firmly as before." I talked to Dr. Simone. She went deeper. "What are you afraid of, Gwen? Are you afraid of him, or are you afraid of the mother inside of you, the one who still wants to forgive and forget everything?" Her question hit me right in the chest. That was it. I wasn't afraid of the Jeremiah of now, the sober man under the watch of the law. I was afraid of myself, afraid of my almost infinite capacity to forgive, to love, to erase the mistakes of my child. It took me a week to decide, and in the end, the answer came not from my head, but from my heart. I had to go. Not for him, for me. I needed to see with my own eyes if the change was real. I needed to close that chapter, not by leaving the pages torn and scattered, but by putting a firm period at the end. A period that could, perhaps, be the start of a new sentence. The mediation session was set for a Tuesday afternoon at the community center near the rehab clinic. A neutral place, safe. I drove myself. As I drove, I felt my stomach churn. I was wearing a simple cotton dress, and I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I felt like I was going to a funeral. The mediator, a kind man named Mr. Peters, met me at the door. He led me to a small room with a round table and 3 chairs. There was a pitcher of water and some glasses. He said Jeremiah was on his way. I sat down, my back straight, my purse in my lap. I waited. Every second was torture. And then the door opened. The man who walked in was not the monster from that night, and he wasn't the smiling boy from my pictures either. He was a stranger. He was thin, so much thinner. The puffiness from the alcohol was gone from his face, revealing the cheekbones he'd inherited from his father. His hair was cut short, and his beard, once scruffy, was neatly trimmed. He wore a simple button-down shirt, ironed, and jeans. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The red, bloodshot eyes of anger and resentment were gone. In their place was a clear but tired gaze, a look that had seen too much crying, a look that carried the weight of a deep shame. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me. He didn't smile. He just looked at me, and I saw both panic and hope warring in his face. Mr. Peters invited him to sit. He sat in the chair across from me, keeping a respectful distance. The mediator began, explaining the rules. Speak respectfully. No interruptions. The goal was not reconciliation, but communication. And then, he gave the floor to Jeremiah. He folded his hands on the table. They were trembling slightly. He looked at his own hands, not at me, as he began to speak. "Mom," his voice was low, almost a whisper. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, not even to be here, but I asked for this meeting because I needed to say it to your face. I needed you to hear it from my mouth." He paused, taking a deep breath, and then he looked up and met my eyes. "I am sorry. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you, for the fear, for the humiliation. I'm sorry for every yell, every cruel word, every night you spent worrying. And I am so sorry. I am so sorry that I raised my hand to you. There's no excuse. There's no justification. It wasn't the alcohol. It was me. A weak, bitter, cruel me. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. The tears were streaming down his face, silent. He didn't wipe them away. In the program, he continued, his voice thick, they make you look at the wreckage you left behind. And my wreckage was you. I almost destroyed you, Mom, and I know that I'm sorry doesn't fix anything. But I needed you to know that I know what I did. I'm not running from it anymore. I listened in silence to every word. I looked for falseness, for manipulation, but I found none. What I saw was a broken man, staring at his own shards. Mr. Peters turned to me. Mrs. Hayes, is there anything you would like to say? I looked at Jeremiah, at my son, and I told him the truth. I believe you, Jeremiah. I believe that you are sorry, and I forgive you. A sob escaped him, a sound of such profound relief it broke my heart. But, I continued, and my voice became firm, forgiving does not mean forgetting, and it does not mean going back to the way things were. That Gwendolyn, the mother who protected you from everything, she doesn't exist anymore. You killed her that night. I saw the pain in his face, but I had to say it. I am your mother, and I will always love you. But now I have to love myself more. Our relationship from today on will have boundaries, strong ones. You have your home, I have mine. You have your life, I have mine. We will not live together again, ever. He nodded, not arguing. We can see each other, from time to time, for a coffee, in a public place. But my house, Jeremiah, my peace, they are no longer open to your storm. You need to learn to be your own safe harbor. It was hard. Every word was hard. But it was the most honest thing I had ever said to him. And so, a year passed. A year of baby steps. We stuck to the arrangement. Every 2 weeks we meet at a simple diner halfway between our homes. We sit in the same booth by the window. We always order the same thing, black coffee for him, tea with lemon for me, and a slice of apple pie to share. We talk about his job at the grocery store, about my garden, about the weather in Savannah. We don't talk much about the past. He's in therapy. He goes to his Alcoholics Anonymous meetings every week. He hasn't had a drop of alcohol since he got out of rehab. The relationship isn't the same. The intimacy, the blind trust of a mother and child, that's gone. Maybe forever. But in its place, something new has grown. A cautious respect, a love with borders. It's a sadder relationship, perhaps, but it's safe. And for me, today, safety is worth more than anything else. Today, sitting on my porch, feeling the late afternoon breeze, I finally feel peace. The house is quiet, but it's a good quiet. It's my quiet. My son is alive. He is sober. And he is becoming, at 42, the man he should have been at 22. It took a terrible act, an immense pain, for it to happen. A mother's love, I learned, sometimes has to be cruel to be kind. They lost everything they tried to steal from me, my peace, my dignity, my home. Jeremiah, in the end, lost his freedom for a time, but in the process, he found a chance to be free from himself. I learned that true love isn't about enduring everything in silence. True love is having the courage to draw a line in the sand and say, I love you, but I love myself more, and you may not cross this. And sometimes the family you choose to stand with you, like a judge next door and a sister in another city, is stronger than the family of blood that tries to tear you down. And you? What would you have done in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you enjoyed my story, please leave a like on the video so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for your kindness. On the screen, you'll see other stories that I'm sure you'll like. Click on one to watch. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.